Welcome everyone. Welcome to this live online event at the Swindon Festival of Literature 2021. Now we're both pleased and grateful that human ingenuity and cutting-edge science and digital technology make it possible for this show to go on, or at least to go on online. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. We do hope that everything is well where you are. Now this event is being recorded, so please do not swear unless it's for poetic purposes. It's also being live streamed on YouTube, but only the host, author and interviewer will be seen. Now, if you'd like to ask a question, type it in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen and the chair will choose it. If your question is chosen, you will be made a panelist to ask your question in person, which means you'll be seen on the live stream. Now, if you want to ask your question but do not want to be seen, please prefix your question with unseen. Okay, hope you're able to follow that. Let's get on with what really matters. Now, it's not before time that tonight's guest author makes a proper and legitimate appearance at the Swindon Festival of Literature. Not only has he been one of its key supporters and helpers for many years, but he has also been active on the streets of Swindon, often getting to its heart as he turns ordinary and extraordinary aspects of ordinary daily life into vivid, urgent and evocative poems. He will be joined by a guest interviewer and poet who has also done good things with words in Swindon. Please join me now in giving a Swindon Festival of Literature welcome to guest interviewer Sarah Jane Arbery and tonight's guest author and activist with his latest collection of Swindon Diamonds, Tony Hillier. Tony, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Yes, I am delighted to be interviewing Tony and celebrating the launch of his fantastic collection of poetry, Swindon Diamonds, with a lovely picture of Tony on the front there, published by Impress. Now, on the back of the book, Matt Holland has written that some poets write like they do not get out much to where the action is. Not Tony. He is out there, on the street, at the barricades, with the people, and his words are witness to that. So I've seen Tony in action many times, and in fact, armed with a maypole at the Dawn Chorus event at the opening of Swindon Festival of Literature. That's a real favourite. So I'm really pleased I've now got the opportunity to pin him down and ask him about being a community poet and find out more about the man behind his community poetry activity. So, Tony, let's begin at the beginning. So you launched yourself as Swindon Community Poet in 2000. What do you mean by that? What for you is a community poet? Well, what's your understanding of community poetry?
Thank you all for the kind introductions, my understanding of community poetry, and also welcome to all the people that I've been texting and Facebooking. Great to see you, although I can't see you on the screen. I know you're there and it's great. Thank you. What do I mean by community poetry? It's many things. At the back of the book, I talk about what I think community poetry is. As you ask me now, it's people's words, it's unheard voices being heard through this mechanism of simple techniques of poetry, just rhyming or repetition. A key thing I like is when I make an effort to use the actual words of people that I meet on the street, or as one of the books behind me shows, I went round on a bicycle in Parks and East Walcott, and I said, hello, I'm your community poet. And of course, some people didn't quite know how to take that, but many people shared their words with me. I jotted them down and then juggled them a bit at home and then printed them in the booklet. Not only that, but I also delivered the booklet back to each person on the social housing estate here in Swindon. A memorable one, and there's no judgment here, because of course poetry is not for everybody, but a memorable one is on page 48. I delivered it to the person at their door. I said, there we are, you're on page 48. And all it was across the top, it said, no, I'm just not interested, mate. And that was it. That was the poem. That to me, to allow that freedom and hear the voices of people's voices that aren't very often or often enough heard, that's a part of probably 10 parts of community poetry.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, certainly for you, you're Swindon community poet. So, and your poetry is so rooted in Swindon. The title of your collection is Swindon Diamonds. Can you just tell us where that title came from? Why have you called your collection that?
Yes, indeed. Well, I produced a poem which ended up being called Swindon Diamonds. It was sponsored by Pebbly Beach, and so I could go around and try to capture the essence of Swindon as I know it. I've lived here for 30 years now. Swindon, I seem to have adopted Swindon, and Swindon seems to have adopted me. And I love it. What I particularly love is all you have to do, and this thought came to me, is scratch the surface of Swindon and you find diamonds. Diamond places, of course, diamond occasions, but really it's the diamond people. It's the people who feature in all of my poetry one way or another, but particularly in the one called Swindon Diamonds. We're all aware, and at risk of repetition, that by some of the popular media and broadsheets, Swindon is sometimes negatively regarded. Well, come here, visit the place, and you will find Swindon has magic in it. Sarah Jane, it has magic in it because it's got people in it.
Yeah.
I'm an optimist about people, and this class is 3/4 full of people. It's and Swindon has got those diamonds, and it's lovely. You just have to scratch the surface, and Swindon people watching will all be thinking now of a list of places and people, and I would go through Lower Shore Farm, Richard Jefferies Museum, the Swindon Poetry Festival, the Civic Society. It has got a society and an organisation for every activity in human life. Nearly 200,000 people, loads and loads of diamonds, gems, any whatever they're called, amethyst, any rich stone or not that you can think of.
Would you read us your poem, Tony, Swindon Diamonds, the title poem, please?
I would be very pleased to. And it's a story really of all of Swindon. And so some people will understand the references, some will not. But it dwells in the past and in the present. And I know it looks to the future too. Swindon Diamonds. Eternity is now, said Richard Jefferies. Like its moonraker cousins, Swindon shows its best face to itself. Son of French Revolution refugee Brunel, enticed Welsh miners to navvy railways, starting Swindon as a mini city of sanctuary. Like a scratched record, media jibes circle our magic roundabout. Whether 33 1/3 or MP3, it's the same old song, making plans for Nigel, or alone again, naturally. Swindon revolves. Swindon revolves, Swindon evolves. Scratching surface, you find diamonds. In town centre, Mangle Wurzel workers once walked on water along Canal Walk over Golden Lion Bridge. Thousands engineered world-class steam trains, hot-bedded, railway villaged, danced, acted, played snooker in their Mechanics Institute. Eternity was then. Since 1854, the Western players play on. Since 1919, the Great Western Railway running shed's male voice choir has sung to Swindon. Scratch surface, find diamonds. Rolled off Swindon assembly lines, Spitfires, Garrard record decks, beloved by the Beatles, Elvis and the BBC, Triumph Bras and 2000s, Rovers, BMW Minis, and new kid off the block, 2 million car Honda. All provenance, pressed steel and rail insiders' skills, sweated and delivered between hooter blasts. Newport Street's 1890 thatch cottages give way today to Subway takeaway. In 1905, Albert Edward Tunley artfully advertised on trams trundling down Regent Street, where today revellers spill onto Swindon streets. Remember the Morris 1100 and Roy Cartwright, who hides on Facebook in plain sight, who pressed steel and welded hundreds of door hinges. Scratch surface, fine diamonds, salute today. 2 days before his retirement, 66-year-old council worker Eric, as he empties Eldine rubbish bins. In memory of a young man's passing, 2 all-weather table tennis tables invigorate Quarry Road Park. Earphoned Indian subcontinent, IT experts walk Old Town to Intel as volunteer Vera leads Nights in White Satin, singing with Swindon elders. Evolving from small town to vibrant global melting pot, eternity is now. Arkles, Deacons, Nationwide Zurich, Iceland, Turkish barbers, Goan workers, Middle East boat people may harbour here. With different pasts, shared futures, welcomed in Swindon, Swindon, city of sanctuary.
Oh, thank you, Tony. It's a cracking poem. Thank you very much. That's really great. And what a great poem for the title of your, the title poem of your book. And I'd just like to go back to something you said earlier, which is about being a community poet and about using the actual words of people. And I'm interested to know, Tony, about how strongly do you feel like a sense of responsibility towards Swindon and the people that you essentially put in your writing? You know, you may be dealing with sensitive or socio-political issues. So what I want to know is do you write it as you see it, or do other things come into play? Do you have to be mindful of sort of sensitivities and civic sensitivities?
Indeed, civic sensitivity, of course, but also personal responsibility and sensitivity to individuals or groups of people's situation. It stems from my own personality, character, and upbringing. The unheard voices I can identify strongly with, as I'm sure many people can, given that I feel in my bones that there are many voices I had when I was a young person that wasn't heard. Nobody asked or nobody listened. And parents and family and friends and the community, of course, did their best, but still there were things that I needed to say. And so I also went on to train as a teacher and a youth and community worker. Therefore, that was a privilege in those days with no student grants. And I wish we returned to that in the future, because I feel very sorry for students today who rack up a debt. I was fortunate, born in 1950. So I trained as a youth and community worker as well as a teacher, but I concentrated on youth and community work. And there I was privileged to work with teenagers in London, girls in a girls' remand home in Leeds. And when the AIDS and HIV issue became popularly known in the mid-80s, I worked with teenagers in London on that. And so it was no surprise that at Pride over 10 years ago, their first event in Swindon, that I wrote a booklet, Words of Pride. So I am particularly sensitive to people's conditions, and I feel that my education and training has given me the privilege really to get closer perhaps to communities than perhaps other people don't.
That is really interesting, Tony. Yeah, I would imagine that kind of background that you have really does have much bearing on you as a community poet. I wonder now, actually, if we could hear another poem just coming on the back of that. Is
Sure.
the poem Civic Sense?
Civic Sense, yeah.
If I'm reading that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Of course, yeah. Civic Sense. And this was written just at the time when Honda had announced that it was going to leave the town after providing employment for over 30 years and many, many wages, of course. So you'll hear some key words to do with cars in it as well. It's not as long as the previous one. It's called Civic Sense. Honda may be on the line, so we walked the line. Marched, magic roundabout to GWR Park, marched through town, banners, passions, hopes held high, hopes high for more civic sense. Speakers, cross-party, cross-culture, cross-community, stressed, unite and stand in unison to press Honda to respect workers, to resist global pressures, so skillful Swindon workers might build millions more eco-friendly cars, to drive forward that civic sense, that common sense every time, so we workers can continue to work the Swindon line.
Thank you, Tony. It's fabulous to be able to sort of talk to you and also hear some of the poems in the collection yourself. That's great. Thank you. I actually just sort of thinking now about when I was reading the collection, also knowing your work as I do, Tony. I would say you're a pretty playful person. You've got a real sense of fun, and I imagine sometimes it must be difficult to kind of balance seriousness and playfulness in your poetry sometimes when you need to. I mean, how do you manage that? How do you get the tone and feel of your poems right for the different circumstances that you find yourself in?
Indeed. I do like a good mess around, as you've seen me on the maypole or on the dance floor at the Beehive. I do definitely like that, and I like a quip and repartee with the audience or just with family and friends. But I have noticed when putting this collection together that a lot of my poems are on the stern side, really. I do a lot of political and community action, and some of those, like the 100 poems against the war, the Iraq War in 2003, whilst they're, people would argue, sometimes preaching to the converted, they do act as a camaraderie boost for people who believe in a certain course of action. But the humour, it comes from, well, music features particularly in this. I do references to songs that people in that Swindon Diamonds poem. There were several, those song titles, Making Plans for Nigel and Nights in White Satin, etc. They were made by Swindon pop stars, and celebrities. The humour, it's difficult to say. Wordplay, and I mean, one of the basic techniques is that I do use, and I will say this, I only use simple poetic techniques, not refined ones that many of my friends use. I may get to that when I get a bit older and retire, but one of the ones that I do use is double or even triple meaning, double entendre, etc., where something on one level might seem, oh, it's just straightforward, but underneath it's got 2 or 3 different meanings at various times. So I do use that. You could ask me to expand a bit more, and I'll focus back down on that question.
Yeah, I mean, actually, what I was going to say is in the book, you talk about the Tony methods for your poetry. So I would basically ask you, like, how would you actually describe your style of poetry? And also as well, actually, because you do talk about performance in the book as well.
Yeah.
How do these Tony methods relate to performance for you as well?
Well, I'm starting to call it pop-up poetry, as I say in the back. Oh, I've just written this. And in fact, I did that the other day at an event. In fact, at the launch of the Literature Festival, I did Zulu Dawn. And how that works is that I'll sit there and somebody will say something, I'll jot it down, I'll scribble it, and I get a thought come into me. And then I've got, Sarah Jane, a very thick, thin skin, if you know what I mean, that I could be, whilst I'm very sensitive inside, sometimes I could be probably perceived and behave in a rather a bit too forward, rather too full of myself. But it's, I think Swindon's got used to me generally, and if I've got something to say, I would like to say it. Often there's celebration poems of events and places. So as it was on Monday morning at dawn with Zulu Dawn, it was because it was such a fantastic occasion. And so I juggled some words and the event had finished, but I then subsequently performed it to the people who were there off screen, as it were. And so I'll be a little bit bold. I'll say, oh, I've just written one, and people will look around who know me or whatever, and allow me to do it and like it, because it reflects. It's like a mirror for the occasion. So I pop up and do it, basically.
Yeah, well, actually, that really leads really nicely on to my next question, actually, Tony, because I was going to ask that. I mean, how do you practically carry out your community poetry work? I mean, are you formally booked by organisations and groups, or do you just turn up and take it from there? I mean, how do you actually work practically?
It's a mix of those. Like I might go to the AGM of the Civic Society and sit there and watch an overhead slides and everything and just jot it down. Unasked, uninvited. It was a public occasion, of course, and then stand and say, oh, if you'd like, I can give you this poem, and do that. But the poetry in the last 20 years, it has, I'm very pleased to say, it has contributed to my mortgage, not in a large way. People pay their plumbers and find it difficult to pay their poets, but I'm very grateful when it happens. And so the Pebbly Beach organisation promoting cars sponsored that Swindon Diamonds, the film that was made of it. And also the local authority and the Swindon Festival of Literature has commissioned me to write some at times. Thames Down buses, I did one on the Thames Down buses. They commissioned me and they put it up on banners on their buses. So it works like that. So it's a mix. I've done poems for sausage rolls or for a plate of beans at a festival. And the best at festivals, the captive audience for poetry is the queue for the loo on a Sunday morning, I found.
Correct.
Could I just say, so that I don't forget, Sarah Jane, if you may, to thank John Richardson. John Richardson, a good friend of mine, he said back in when I had my 70th birthday, beginning of the year, said, I'll produce a booklet for you if you get poems to me one a day by the end of January. He knows I love the whoosh of a passing deadline. So thank you, John Richardson, for making this happen, because I'm not that good a completer finisher.
Well done. Well done, Tony. Actually, I would like you to read another poem, actually, if I may. The one I'd like you to read is The Honey Shot, when you were poet in residence for the Beehive Pub cricket team.
Thank you.
Could you read that one, Tony? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and this comes from 2016. As some of you may know, the Beehive is what would be called an alternative pub in Swindon. It's known for various things. A philosopher was booked there once many years ago, and the local cricket team is a true community cricket team, and I was asked to go along and write this. the honey shot. Ladies and gentlemen, and cucumber sandwiches, may I present the Beehive cricket team, the team that sadly knows no boundaries, the pub that never fields its B team, the Swindon pub full of A-list and list support artists. May I present Jason and the Afterports, even when Beehive bats blindfold, even when portcullis Beehive still ups its prospects, always storms the castle, another pub, mid-on, storms its gullies, floods its outfields. Jason and the out for noughts and crosses. Team slips horizontal with its iconic Xmas tree, yet stands erect every summer day, whittling out runs, without crosswords, with charm. Often bowling the maiden queen over, slapping willow on leather, no sting in no tail, no sting in no tail. The WYSIWYG big team, the what you see is what you bumbling get. You get Jason and the Afterthoughts. This isn't cricket. Beehive makes and takes the honey shot. This is pub and cricket in Swindon. This is community. This is community cricket.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Tony. I really like that one. I love the way you were really sort of flamboyant there in your performance.
Yes, you said, you asked me earlier, Sarah Jane, about performing, and the way I describe it is I kind of ham it up and emphasize things. Also, I'm known for moving around the room and standing on my tiptoes when I read. I don't know why. It must be because I'm a bit of a short bloke. But I do, and I move around and engage their eyes and everything. And because I believe poems are best served hot. Not all of them, but when you've just written it and you just deliver it, then everybody's warm. People know what the references are, and magic things happen. And when I run writing groups, the magic happens there. So I do a lot of work as well, supporting other people who perhaps haven't written poetry before. And that's a very important aspect of community poetry. And so you have 6 people sitting round, or I've never written it before or whatever, and I say what you write is right. And I just create an ambience where they're respected, of course, that's crucial to it, and people free up a bit. And when somebody writes something, and we're invited to share it, you don't have to, somebody will read it out, and you get, Sarah Jane, an ah moment, as somebody looks at it and says, wow, where did that come from?
Yeah.
That is magic. And I know you've done similar yourself. Absolutely fantastic. And I can remember one particular one, and it was in the SOCs, the school group of parents whose children were at the infant. And one poet there, Jerry, she wrote, I hang the cloak of motherhood on the back of the kitchen door. Beautiful, beautiful.
Yes, those sorts of moments really stick in the memory, don't they?
Indeed, indeed. I know you've done it because you're a consummate writer and group worker as well.
Well, I was going to say, Tony, actually, just going back to your, your kind of sort of writing, amongst basically not your workshop work. I was going to go back to that and to ask, generally, what kind of reception do you get? I mean, is it generally good and positive? I mean, have you ever had to deal with sort of more difficult or challenging situations as a community poet? Are you there, Tony?
I mean, working with some groups of people. I've worked with groups that are sometimes regarded as difficult to deal with, but as my training as a youth and community worker, I've worked with some challenging teenagers. So I've worked with teenagers as well. So of course you will have that kind of bravado behavior at times. And so I'm challenged to get the lead person on side, as it were. But I'm not confrontational. I try to read the situation, and it hasn't got me into any fights, as it were. I read a community or group situation, and I feel I've enough experience to know when to stand back. I'm only a little old bloke now. I used to be a little young bloke, but so I don't kind of invite violence as it's such. On the matters of when I do my political poetry, of course, some passers-by might shout some obscenity or some alternative political or community point of view, but that's grist to the mill, really. That is what should happen, really. But in precise answer to your question, I can't bring to mind a difficult situation, because I suppose it's a bit like Father Christmas. The essence of community poetry is to go with the will of the people, as individuals or with groups. So I'm not going to look for trouble or force, it's not a question of forcing anybody to do anything. So it's a bit like Father or Mother Christmas or whatever. I was going to say something else, but I'll claim 70 years old and say I've forgotten it in a moment now, so I'll come back to you.
We'll come back to it, I'm sure. But I mean, one of the things I really like about your book is its wide perspectives. So you focused on the one hand on sort of homegrown local issues and activity, but many of your poems also span sort of global themes and how they relate to Swindon and their impact on Swindon. So, for example, a particularly memorable poem is that you address the murder of George Floyd in America and subsequent Black Lives Matter protests in Swindon. So, reading your collection, you get a real sense of the connection of things, the sense that everything's connected and so that issues on a global level will have an impact on a local level and vice versa. Can you just sort of shed some more light on that, please? What were your thoughts about that?
Sure. I think it stems back to a very early question you asked me about what is community poetry, and we talked about getting unheard voices heard. Not only have I grown up passionately believing that to be what should happen, that unheard voices should be heard, I also am passionate about justice. Many people are, but when I see injustice, whether it's the Iraq War or whether it's the murder of George Floyd, as two examples, or whether it's school teachers being asked to go back to schools where they're not, where they don't believe it to be safe, and or across the whole spectrum, then my thoughts and passions rise, and I think, no, we need to do something about it. So I do it in political and community action, but I also do it through my words and share them, and it vents my feelings as well. And I can recommend it for anybody. In fact, diverting just slightly, I would like to say that every community should have its community poet. I challenge any viewers now or in the future to look around their workplace, their community, whether it's town or workplace or education, and stand forward and become their community poet or nominate somebody to be it. Because we're like spokespeople, we're like escape valves for emotions, and possibly, like all art, we might inspire a new thought, a new poem, a new action, and all sorts of things that art happens. And people might disagree with it, so you can have a conversation. So I would urge people to appoint or step forward as a community poet themselves. But coming back then to the global issues, I'm a bloke trying to do life. I believe everybody else is. I've done much travel to distinctive places of Kenya and Calcutta. We don't know how lucky we are here for many of the things. As much as I complain and want improvements, but when our lights work, when our justice system works, when our political system works, when our contract for employment works, then that's a good base to start with. Many countries I've been to, they don't have that fallback, and therefore that's wrong. And I would like to be part of changing it. And some of the poems, and if you throw in Greta Thunberg and the Extinction Rebellion, then they all need something doing and saying and sharing. And the way to share that is through one method is protest. And so recently I'm protesting about the right to protest. Protest is a human right. And you, Sarah Jane, may wish to protest about something with which I disagree, but you must protest. So I care because I'm privileged to be having a great life. I want other people to as well. It's surely not rocket science to think that all the people in the world, and I do have perhaps too much sometimes carried the weight of the world's shoulders on my shoulders, but surely it's not too much to ask. There are enough resources in the world for everybody to eat, have a job, have an education, and have freedom. We just need to juggle them seriously.
Yes, that really does come on to my, question here that I had for you, which is, do you see yourself as a community poet, and do you see yourself as a chronicler or a witness of the times we live in, an ambassador or an activist, or even an enabler, as you were talking about workshops earlier?
Definitely, when I was writing the introduction and the piece at the back, the word witness came up, that I take word photographs of issues or actions or people. I don't want that person who emptied the Eldine rubbish bin to be forgotten. And indeed, COVID has made us all remember the person who empties our rubbish bin. And so community poetry is a witness. It is potential for new actions as an activist. It's perhaps potential to shockingly change community political parties' minds. I hope so. There's one in there about knocking doors at the Labour Party, and it's very hard-hitting. So it does act as a witness of what happened in 2019 in December. And it's on the record now, and that's another reason why every community should have one, in my view. Or let me put it this way, I invite all the communities to have one. Let's bear witness to what's happening, and let's bring about the changes we agree should be made or could be made.
Could I invite you to read another poem, please, Tony? Just coming on the back of something you said earlier about the issue of schools opening up after lockdown, or when that was going to happen. And you've got a fantastic poem in the collection called School Pigeons' Dreams. I wonder if you could read that for us, please.
Thank you. And that was in January 21, and it's dedicated to Debbie Brown and her NEU, National Education Union, and school colleagues who successfully delayed fuller opening of schools until COVID safer. School Pigeons' Dreams. Over the top at Gallipoli and the Somme, bombing Dresden, Pearl Harbor and Nagasaki do not compare with even Swindon Primary School deciding to hold pupils back for one day, thus holding back that particular whistle. Before, with the best COVID guidelines in the world, pupils hunch over desks, over the top of each other like carrier stool pigeons, supervised by exposed teachers. What even Swindon Primary School, with its head above the political playground parapet, has bravely done, its Section 44 duty, its duty of care to staff and pupils. this school has sent a carrier pigeon to us all, quoting, "Make new choices, dream new images, create new ways to live and fully heal the world, and tread softly, for you tread on my dreams. Even Swindon Primary School dreams of listening, lessons learned, dreams of loving communities."
I love that poem, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading that. And
Thank you.
I suppose a quick question really, before I come on to the audience questions, which I see there are a couple typed into the Q&A. So
Thank
please,
you.
anybody watching, if you'd like to type in your question, please do. We have a good sort of 10 minutes to do that. Just a quick question I'd like to slip in though, Tony, is that that poem is one of the most recent ones you've written and deals with the pandemic. And I just wonder, as a community poet, how has COVID impacted on your work and how have you adapted to it?
Indeed. I've surprised myself that I haven't done perhaps one or two COVID related poems as such, but I'm also very much aware that it's a voluntary job for me, as it were, in that I can choose to do it when I like. So also age plays a factor, and that's another global thing. Because I'm now of pensionable age, I'm very grateful that, unlike many, many people during COVID, they had to go out and earn a living to keep the roof over their head. Because of previous work I've done for 39 years or whatever, I luckily had a pension system that worked, so I can keep a roof over my head and food. Therefore, I wasn't as challenged in that way at all as were many other artists, be they dancers, musicians, performers, circus skills people, the bands and the groups. The whole community cultural sector has been really hard hit, I know. Some have gone to Zoom, but not everybody can fit on Zoom. So I would say that I feel very fortunate and grateful that I have not been impacted in terms negatively on my community poetry. I'm very grateful for that, but I'm not unaware, as none of us are, of the dramatic impact on other artists and cultural people. Everybody, of course, but in this particular case, artists and cultural people. I hope that in that aspect and all, as many as possible other aspects, that we reflect on COVID and some of the wonderful community cohesion that's happened during COVID carries forward in the years when we better manage COVID.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Tony. I'm now going to turn to some questions from the audience, if that's okay.
Great.
So we have two questions in the Q&A so far. So the first question is from Angela Atkinson, and I think she would like to ask the question herself. So if our wonderful...
Press the right buttons.
Excellent, that's great, it's all working. Angela, please go ahead.
There we go, you can hear me and see me.
Hi, Angela.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to possibly embarrass Tony just by saying I greatly admire Tony's work. I've observed him for several years now. And Swindon Diamonds, the poem and the film, I didn't see it at the time it was made. I found it on Google, probably randomly searching for something else, and came across it. And I just find it completely moving. I know enough about Swindon to get every single reference in it. And I think it's supremely clever and wonderful. So well done, Tony.
Thank you.
And I've really enjoyed this. It's been really cool. But what I wanted to ask Tony was that, so Swindon Diamonds is, if you like, an ode to Swindon, to the whole of Swindon, past and present. And as you know, in the present right now, the Oasis is under threat. I know you've been involved with that somewhat, as have I. And I wondered, did you have in mind to write anything, a poem to the Oasis, about the Oasis, celebrating the Oasis?
I think I've made a few references to it, and on one, I remember on one of the protests out the front that I juggled with the words of famous musicians on that and played some wordplay on that, but wouldn't claim that to be the Oasis poem. But I think, Angela, you've prodded me a little bit. I'm challenged by that. I will get out my pencil and paper, or pencil and card that I use, and begin some work on it. Of course, because it's very important that we have good leisure services across Swindon. It's been demonstrated by the campaign very well that the dome there is iconic, and if there is a way to save it, then I would love that to happen. I would, as I've answered that question, Sarah Jane, say what the beauty of community, of poetry really, and writing, but poetry is, it's simply, the thing I like about it is that it's very simple in its essence. It's a piece of card and it's a pencil. And that's all the tools you need. And just begin to write. And that's what I love about it, that it's as simple as that at one level. And I would urge all watchers and listeners to this programme to have a go. What you write is right. It's not a competition, but you can express your thoughts and feelings and share them, and it's a joy.
Thank you, Tony. We have another question. This is from Nathan Sutton. And again, I believe he wants to ask it himself.
Yeah. Nathan next door.
Okay, fire ahead, Nathan.
Might need to unmute him. Mute button, Nathan.
I think you're muted there, Nathan. You need to great.
I'll knock on the wall. Nathan.
Sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear you now, Nathan. Yeah. Go on, Nathan.
Sorry, I'm on...
I think the connection is a bit, it's a bit dodgy there, Nathan. I might have to ask you a question myself because time's pressing. So, sorry, Nathan, I'll just dip in here. Can you hear me, Tony?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah. Nathan's question is, have you ever written any poems about your Eastcott neighbours?
Only in general terms, Nathan. I've only written poems about my Escott neighbours in general terms, in such as what a lovely place Swindon is. And I didn't write one, for example, about the minicar that went only 60 metres and turned over on its roof. That would be a poem in its waiting. You know, that's ready to be written. But really, Nathan, as a neighbour of mine, I haven't written about you yet. I think about you every day, of course, but I haven't written about you yet. And it could well come, because you might invite me, Nathan, to be the poet in residence for the hockey team that you play for. Oh, I got that one in, didn't I? So I'm ready and waiting to write for the hockey team that you play for, Nathan, and look forward to that. Thank you.
Our next question is from Neil Mercer, who I believe wants to ask you the question himself.
That'll be great.
Okay. Are you there, Neil? Just unmute.
Need to be unmuted, Neil.
Video.
Yeah. Oh, you were unmuted for a minute, Neil. Neil, nice to see you. Abby.
You just unmute, Neil.
The mute button.
There we go.
That's it.
Yeah.
Can you hear me
I
now?
can hear you.
Yes.
Hello, both of you. Nice to see you.
I was just wondering about. I found, as a sort of musician, part-time musician, I found sort of lockdown a strange situation in terms of gives you huge amounts of free time, but is actually, I found it very stifling creatively, and it's completely, I've not been half as creative as I could be because I'm not mixing with other people. and I need other people to be creative. And I was just wondering what it's been like for you, whether you found it, all that extra time is very useful to you, or whether you found it difficult to be creative as well.
Thank you for asking that, Neil. And viewers at home may not know that Neil is a consummate musician who performs brilliant music in a number of groups. And I dance to the music you perform as well, don't I, Neil? In answer to your question, it's very difficult to put this, and it's a cliche, but I've had a good COVID. I've had a good COVID, and the reason for that is because, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't have to worry about going out and going to work. And we pensioners haven't. We can choose how close we get to people or how distant we can stay from them. And therefore, I've been lucky enough to be able to balance that and have managed through the internet, whether it's Facebook or other forms of it, as well as walking around the block. I did allow myself to go out around the block, etc. And also I do work part-time as a gardener, a few hours a week. So gardeners were allowed to still work. So I could go to an isolated gardener, and that was actually very therapeutic as well. I used to call it my meditation sessions, really. So I managed well to find a balance, but I'm absolutely not immune to the fact that for many people, and I hear many artists, they did feel that it was an anathema, if that's the right word, that one had loads of time on one's hand and perhaps could be creative, but it didn't happen. And as I mentioned earlier about writing COVID poems, I wasn't driven to write that much during lockdown and all that. So, but I would like to add one thing as well, which is that I have heard stories of friends, neighbours, or whatever, of people who felt very enclosed, and that it's affected their mental health as well. And that's not surprising. I mean, I'm somebody who has experienced depression throughout my life at various stages, but I'm very grateful and thankful that through self-mind management in the last nearly a decade now, I've had far fewer episodes of depression than I'd had in previous years. But the light that shines on mental health issues in our society is not bright enough, and the resources available through the austerity, I've got the Swindon People's Assembly flag up there, is a blight on society, austerity, to cut back on public services. So I want to see a boost in those as appropriate for people who might have triggered mental health issues and strain and anxiety during COVID. So I will be out there as one of those protests, but also engaging in the bills going through Parliament as well at whatever level I can. And so I feel grateful that I haven't felt stymied in my creativity, but I'm sensitive to others who have.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
I think we're getting close to our time now. There are some questions, about 3, that are still remaining in the chat, but in the Q&A. But I believe you'll be able to answer them afterwards. Is that right?
Yes, I through the technology and everything else, I would love to get back to people who've made comments or questions, and I'm hoping through the tech team of the Swindon Festival of Literature, a flag of which I must hold up. 25 plus years it's been going, and I think it's been a considerable part of me loving Swindon, because it's great. It's absolutely great.
Thank you, Tony. And I'm sorry to those people that we haven't had time to look at your questions yet this evening, but Tony will be in touch with you, I promise. And I'd just like to finish by saying thank you, Tony. It's been an absolute pleasure to interview you tonight, and Swindon is really lucky to have you as their community poet. It's just, you just do such a brilliant job. So respect to you, thank you. And thanks so much for the collection. I will treasure it. Thank you.
There is
Thank
one
you.
more important question that Neil asks: where can you buy the book?
Where can you buy the book? If you on the chat, in any of the chats, the Zoom or the YouTube, if you're able to, if you want to put your contact details in it there, address or email or something, then I can send you one. They're a £5 if I send them to you, and I would love to do that. Also, the publisher, not my friend, but the one who printed it, in fact, is called Blurb, and we'll put the details on various electronic things. But I'm afraid they do charge more, at least about twice the price because of the postage and package. So I'm protective of people needing to pay lots for it. Also, we have a secret plan to have a launch day in Swindon, but basically through WhatsApp, any of the social media contacts that you've got for me, let me know and I'll put one in the post for you, and you could pay by PayPal or even old-fashioned check, or not pay at all, because this isn't about the money, but to say at the end that any profit, which will average £1 for the book, will go to Twigs, a marvellous charity for gardening for people experiencing mental health issues. So it's all in the community mix, and I really appreciate the people who've looked in so far and who will look in the future. So I'll splash it out as much as I can, how to get the book. Thank you.
Tony, thank you very much. We will, can you hear me?
Yeah.
We will put a notice of your contact details and how people can get the book after the recording on the festival's YouTube channel.
Oh, that's
so
great.
If people missed everything you've said just then, it will be up for a good while yet in the recording of this event, which has been fantastic. I've enjoyed every minute of it. The Swindon Festival of Literature says, how cool that Tony Hillier says community poetry can inspire action and reaction, which flies in the face of what W.H. Auden said last century, poetry makes nothing happen. It's great that in the 21st century, poetry does make some things happen, and I'm glad to celebrate that at the Swindon Festival of Literature. And the Swindon Festival of Literature says, thank you everyone for attending this first live event that we've done at the festival after the Dawn Chorus. Most of the others have been recorded. Thank you very much for joining us, brilliant, and forgive us those few hiccups at the start. The Swindon Festival thanks our technician, Louisa Davison, very much for her part in this. The Swindon Festival also thanks Sarah Jane Arbery for her part in the interview this evening. But most of all, the Swindon Festival of Literature says, Tony Hillier, we thank you. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Till we meet again, keep well, everyone.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.